Okay, so today what I want to do is just go through this PowerPoint presentation with you. And basically, what we're doing is we are just doing sort of an introduction right now. The first module will basically be kind of this introduction. So, what I want to do is start with this introduction to diversity, multiculturalism, and social justice. So, one of the first things I want you to do is grab a piece of paper. So, I'll give you just a second or two to do that. You can hit pause, obviously. So, what I want you to do is take a minute to complete this sentence. I am. And I'm going to give you a minute to do this. And I want you to write as many words as you can possibly think of to describe yourself. If someone said to you to finish that sentence that says, I am, and I want you to do that. So, starting now, I'm going to give you 1 minute to complete this sentence. Ready? Go ahead. I am. Okay, so after that, I want you to take a look at the list. When you did that, take a look and see, and it's going to show you what mattered to you. When you did that, what came up? Did you mention your race? Who did, who didn't? It's very interesting when we look at that because what we find, and what you probably saw in some of the reading, is that our dominant cultures tend to take their culture for granted. So, unfortunately, we can't have this as a live discussion, but typically in my face to face classes, when I do this, what a lot of times those of us who are in a dominant culture, we typically don't mention our race, but those of us who are in a minority culture, we do, or they do rather. So it's really interesting. So why is that? For the most part, why that is that when we're in a dominant culture or a dominant race or a dominant religion, we often don't bring that up. And why is that? And one of the things we're going to explore over the course of the semester is that when you're in a dominant culture or that aspect of your identity is dominant or a majority, it's not something we ever really need to think about. But if it's a minority aspect, we do. So that tends to come out when we're answering this question. Why do we identify that we do? Why did you pick the words that you picked? Typically, we tend to pick these words because these are parts of our identity that matter most to us. But one of the things that I have found, and that you may agree with when you do this exercise, is these can ebb and flow. Sometimes these identities are more dominant than others depending on the context. Where are we? What role are we playing? Who are we with at the time? Where are we, even geographically, etc.? So sometimes when I've done this exercise, if I'm in my work mode, professor might come out. If I do this at home, mom might come out first. If I happen to have just gone to the grocery store, short might come out because I just couldn't reach something and on one of the counters, on one of the shelves. This happens to me a lot, by the way. So depending, and then as I have gotten older or different things have changed in my life, different identities come to the surface and are more important to me. So that's something that can happen a lot as well. Okay. So, something as we do that, I want you to be thinking about as the semester goes on, how our identities weave this sort of tapestry into our lives as to who we are. And we'll get more into intersectionality as we go on, but that's something that'll happen. One of the things that's discussed in this first part of the semester is this concept of domination and subordination. What is that about? Is this about power and authority? And I want you to talk about that. So, one of the quotes in the reading was targeted groups are labeled defective or substandard. Why is that? Well, it's really about power, right? And this sort of balance of power. Who has the power and why? That's my next question. And it's really this concept of survival. This was in a lot of the readings that you did for this module, which is really the idea of who wants to survive and who wants to have the power. And if you think about that, there's all these concepts of this sort of long-standing issues of people wanting to keep certain groups down because they think that's how they are going to maintain their power. So there were groups that would often try to assimilate, and self-hatred, right? Take a minute and think about that. Are there examples, even in your own life or times that you've seen, where minority cultures have tried to fit in or acculturate or assimilate? Um, so take a second and think about that. I was just thinking about this. Lewis and I were watching a show called A Plot Against America. If you guys haven't seen it, it's very relevant to this course. And one of the programs that they put in place, it's loosely based on a true story, was a program for Jewish people in America in the 1940s. And the program they were starting was called Just Folks, which was an idea to get other Americans to see Jewish people as just ordinary Americans, just folks, and to send young Jewish people out into rural America to kind of get them just like everybody else. Made me think of this. I think other examples that have come up in class, black Americans trying to straighten their hair or lighten their skin, or people changing their names. So there's so many examples, and ones that you can probably think of yourself. The next concept that I wanted to talk about with this idea of domination and subordination is there a hierarchy of oppression? Do you think that some groups are more oppressed than others? Super interesting, and I want us to talk about this maybe in one of the discussion boards or the reflections that you're doing. But this is a very interesting concept, because I think there are some groups that do think they are more oppressed than others. And I'm not here to say one's right or one's wrong, but it's a very interesting question. One of the videos that you'll see in this module is from Will and Grace, and it's super funny, and it's a great video, but it talks about who's more oppressed, who's the most oppressed, and they kind of order it. And it's a great video, but it really demonstrates this concept of the hierarchy of oppression and who is the most oppressed, and is anybody more oppressed than anybody else? So I think that's an interesting concept that I want you to think about when we talk about these sort of foundational concepts of domination, subordination, oppression, those kinds of things. And then I want you to start thinking about in this module, where are you dominant? You may be from a very marginalized and minoritized population, but are there places within those identities that you are dominant, or you are part of the majority? One of the things that we're going to explore throughout this course is that most of us have some dominance somewhere in our lives. Where do you have that? Where do you experience that? Maybe you've never thought about that. So when you looked back at that list of identities that you just came up with, is any of that part of the dominant culture? Is any of that part of the majority? And one of the things that we think about is that we have places where we do have a lot of privilege. Even in light of certain circumstances, I think a lot about the privileges that I have. Right now, Lewis and I both are fully employed in light of what's going on with the coronavirus and people that are losing jobs. Lewis and I have relatively stable jobs. We have high educations. We have lots of places that we're privileged. So even though I have other areas where I'm not so privileged as a woman, Jewish, other areas, there are places where I do have privilege. So when I've had this conversation in my face-to-face courses, there are a lot of my students who come from very minority and underprivileged backgrounds, but they are able to find places in their lives where they are very privileged, or they are very dominant. So I want you to be thinking about some of those. How do all of your identities intersect, and where do you have some privilege and some dominance? Okay. So how do we categorize ourselves and others? When we did that first exercise, you're basically categorizing yourself, right? You're coming up with categories where you fit. It's basically looking at this concept of who are our people, and does that matter? Do we treat them differently? Some of the videos that I posted, or I'm trying to post, touch on this. I had a great video rather, from Blackish. It was called "Why Do We Not Snitch on Other Blacks?" And it really explored this concept. Unfortunately, I can't find it. It was removed from YouTube. Some of you may have seen the episode, but it was basically an episode where Dre and his son were doing a neighborhood watch, and they were calling on each other about different neighborhood issues that were happening. And then there was a party where it was Black people in the neighborhood, and his son called, and Dre had to explain to him why we don't snitch on other Blacks. And it was sort of this whole really interesting episode about, because there are people and why we don't do that. I can't explain it as well as the episode did. Maybe some of you are familiar with it, but it was really poignant, and I'm really mad I can't find the video. I'll keep trying. And if any of you know how to get videos that I can't find, let me know. But it was a really interesting concept of how, excuse me, how we protect one another because there are people. Should that be the case? Should it not? I want you thinking about that. But it's this whole idea of how, when it comes to these concepts of identities and social justice and populations and these foundational concepts, we do put each other in these categories. And when we meet other people, we ask certain questions, right? Think about questions you ask when you're just getting to know someone. These are just some I came up with, but I'm sure you have others. Where are you from? What high school or college did you attend? Do you belong to X church or X synagogue? Are you a blank team fan? You know, for me, people always ask, oh, are you a Red Sox fan? Are you a Patriots fan? And all those things, because I'm trying to find out, do I connect with them? Are they from Massachusetts? Do they know things that I knew? Why do we do this? Because we're basically asking the question, are you one of us or are you not, right? We're trying to connect. We're trying to find out, do we understand one another? Are you going to have my back? It's that kind of question. Do we have a basic understanding of one another? Do we have shared experiences? And I think it's really interesting because it comes to culture, it comes to life experience, history, all these things that we talk about. But why does that matter? And that was the question I'm asking, what are we looking for? Which I think I just talked about, but it's sort of that idea of commonality and common bond and safety, right? We don't want to always push to do something different. We're scared a little bit of that. And are we judging? Do we make assessments about people based on their answers? I would argue we do. And part of what we're trying to do is not do that. We're trying to get our students to push out of those comfort zones a little bit, to challenge those judgments, challenge those assessments, because I think we do make some snap decisions saying, oh, you're not one of us. You're not one of my people. You're not my kind. Therefore, we aren't going to get along, or we're not going to see the same things. So I think part of this class is to try to challenge those assumptions and get people to not continue to do that. Okay. So one of the things I want you to also be thinking about are these systems of structural inequality. It's in one of our books on page 13, and they talk about all these different structural inequalities and are they already set up? And I want you to look at this and see, how is this on college campuses? Do you see this there? Do you see this elsewhere? Thinking about these already embedded structural inequalities and what are they set up to do and how are they impacting us? Okay, I think that's the main part of this first PowerPoint. In this first module, this first part of this module, I want you just thinking about these foundational concepts. There's a lot of reading in this first one. There's some good videos, some sharing that we're gonna do, and we'll start with these basic concepts and then we'll get into each individual sort of ism from there. Okay, that's it.